So I would be very curious to hear, one, how you sort of explain the fine-tuning problem for our listeners who aren't familiar with it, and two, how you go about addressing it in the purpose of the universe.
Good, yeah, it's a fascinating problem, and it's just something that's captured me in the last few years. Actually, well, it's the surprising discovery of recent decades that for life to be possible, certain numbers in physics had to be like Goldilocks porridge, just right. You know, perhaps the example that's most baffled cosmologists revolves around dark energy, the force which pushes apart the universe. We know now, since the end of the 90s, our universe is not just expanding, it's accelerating in its expansion. So physicists postulate a force that's pushing things apart we call dark energy. Now, when we measured dark energy, we discovered it's a quite surprising number. It's like really tiny, but not quite zero, which physicists say is a really weird number to find in basic physics. But it's fortunate it is that of that form, because if it was a bit bigger, the force would have been a bit stronger. Everything would have shot apart so quickly that no two particles would have ever met. We wouldn't have had stars, planets, any kind of structural complexity. Whereas if it had been less than zero, it's very close to zero. If it had been less than zero, it wouldn't have counteracted gravity, and the whole universe would have collapsed back on itself a split second after the Big Bang. So for life to be possible, for any kind of interesting chemistry to be possible, that number had to be in this very narrow range, just right, not too strong, not too weak, like Goldilocks porridge, just right. So, look, there's a huge debate here. I get into all of the objections, I hope, in the book, but ultimately, I think we face a dilemma. Either this is just an incredible fluke that these numbers in our physics, I just gave one example, there are many, that these numbers are just right for life. And I think it is, when you look into it, it's too improbable to take seriously. Or those numbers in physics are as they are because they are right for life. In other words, that there is some kind of goal-directedness towards life at the fundamental level, at the very early stage of the universe. Now, that's weird. That's not how we imagine science to be. But I think we're sort of, at the moment, in denial about this for cultural reasons, because it's not how we imagine science to be. And, I think it's a little bit like in the 16th century where we started getting evidence that we're not in the center of the universe, and people couldn't handle that and tried to wish it away and explain it in all sorts of ad hoc ways. And now we look back and think, oh, those stupid religious people, why didn't they just follow the evidence? But I think every generation absorbs a worldview it can't see beyond. And I think something like that's going on with fine-tuning now. I think future historians looking back will think, how did they just ignore this evidence for so long? So what I try to argue in the book, I don't like most people go to the God hypothesis, that God fiddled with the numbers. I don't like that hypothesis either, for reasons we could perhaps get into. But I think it is evidence for what I call cosmic purpose, some kind of fundamental future goal directedness. And we just have to put aside our biases, both religious and secular, and just follow the evidence where it leads. And this is what I try to make sense of in the book. Why? And maybe panpsychism can help us a little bit with that.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to ask is this related, this cosmic purpose, is it related, on your view, to the pan-agentialism that we were just discussing? Maybe in the same way that my consciousness emerges from on the panpsychist view, from the primitive mentality of all these parts of me, does the universe's agency or purpose arise from the pan-agentialism, or the agency of all its components?
I don't think quite pan-agentialism can help with this problem. I use pan-agentialism to address a different set of challenges to do with the evolution of consciousness and why natural selection didn't just make very complicated survival mechanisms with no conscious experience, but just programmed to survive very well. That's where the panagentialism goes. But I don't think panagentialism helps with fine tuning. In fact, I mean, in the book, I actually consider a range of hypotheses. Why I don't like the God hypothesis is the familiar problem of evil, the challenge of reconciling an all-loving, powerful God with the terrible suffering we find in the universe. Why would a God let that happen? One possibility I consider is just sort of tweaking the properties of the cosmic designer. Maybe it's a bad designer, or a designer of limited abilities who's just made the best universe she can. Or maybe the Nick Bostrom's simulation hypothesis, that maybe we're in a computer simulation and our designer is just some random computer programmer. So that's one possibility. I also take seriously a sort of primitivism about cosmic purpose. Maybe it's just a basic fact about reality, that it aims at these goals, and that there isn't a sort of consciousness underlying that. It's just a primitive fact about this goal directedness. Aristotle, for example, thought the world was filled with purposes and goals without there being a designer that had embedded them. But finally, and this is how what does connect to the panpsychism, I think ultimately my favorite hypothesis is cosmopsychism, the idea that the universe itself is a conscious mind with its own goals. A very different, alien, weird kind of conscious mind, very different to a naturally evolved mind. But I try to suggest this isn't as extravagant as you might at first think, and fits with panpsychism, which I think is an independently plausible solution to the philosophical consciousness problems, and offers a quite surprisingly parsimonious solution to the fine-tuning problem. Why postulate a cosmic designer outside the universe if we can just think, maybe the universe is conscious and it fine-tuned itself?